Thanks very much, Randy, for the introduction and for having me here, and to everyone who braved the adverse conditions, shall we say, that are going on outside to make it. As Randy said, I've been in Israel and Palestine for about 6 months volunteering with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And this happened to be a period that saw a major escalation in the amount of demolitions and evictions, not only in the West Bank, but inside Israel's 1948 borders. So these would be houses of citizens of Israel. And so it's become an even larger issue than it used to be. And of course, with the settlement freeze over, and the settlement enterprise being intimately tied to the issue of house demolitions, all these issues are getting new salience, sort of, in the state of the peace process as it is today. So what I want to do basically is divide this into sort of 3 sections. The first being a sort of review of the history since '48 of the settlement enterprise and the population movements within Israel. And because it's really vital to have an understanding of that as a motivation for where Israel does house demolitions these days, how they're targeted, what their purpose is, and how to predict the future sort of direction which house demolitions are likely to take. Then I want to talk about the house demolitions themselves, their effects on people, the consequences they have for Palestinians. And I have video of a mass demolition of a village in the Negev, Al-Rakib, which was in the news a fair bit a while ago, but has sort of dropped out of it, even though it keeps getting redemolished over and over. And then towards the end, if we have a bit of time, I'll devote a general section to sort of how activism looks when you're in Jerusalem or in the West Bank. So, we begin in 1947, as, I guess I shouldn't face up there, as most presentations about Israel begin. And this is the UN partition plan, which basically the UN decided that there should be a Jewish state and an Arab state. They chose the boundaries roughly based on where the major population centers were, although this did give the Jewish state a disproportionate amount relative to their population. Of course, largely that's because of the large empty space in the Negev. Now, famously, the Arab countries rejected this proposal, and the 1948 war ensued, which the Israelis call the Independence War, and the Arabs call the Nakba, or the catastrophe. And the perception on that is often that the Arabs were the one who rejected a good chance at peace, whereas the Israelis were willing to take the UN plan and settle for what we would now term a much better than two-state solution. But in reality, there's strong evidence that the Israeli leadership not expected the Arabs to reject the deal and wanted them to. And this is because if you look at the borders of the putative Jewish state on this map, they're very difficult to defend. They're not the kind of borders that would be easy to deploy a military in. You can see that there's very narrow bits. There's basically surrounded from all sides by what the Israelis would consider their enemies. And so it's very unlikely that the leadership, who largely grew out of the paramilitary organizations like the Irgun and Hagana during the sort of war with the British, would accept a geographic compromise. And in fact, I think it's systematically underplayed the degree to which military strategy rather than ideology is a factor in Israeli settlement expansions. And when we look in a little bit at the patterns of Israeli expansion and how they are geographically distributed across Palestine, that will become quite apparent.